You're listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode of Rootbound is brought to you by rain. Rain, the preferred precipitation of flora worldwide.
Thank you for joining me on Rootbound. My name is Steve, and today at the top of the show, we're going to do a little bit of math, because when I first started this show, I thought it'd be really fun for people to tell me about plants that mean something to them, and then for me to tell them about plants that mean something to me. And you know what? It is really fun. I'm really enjoying the show, but now it has dawned on me that I'm going to have to talk about a lot of plants. And so I did a little bit of a back-of-the-envelope math here, and there are over 435,000 species of plants in the world, and if I do one a week, that equates to about 8,000 years worth of shows. I divide that by 2 because the guest is also talking about a plant, and so that's about 4,000 years that we could do the show. So that's great, but the little caveat that the plant also has to mean something to me and the guest, and so for me, I'm like, oh wait, how many plants mean something to me? And there's a lot, but then I figured out a small loophole is I can at least talk about every plant that grows in my yard and garden, right? If I can't think of a plant that doesn't grow in my yard and garden, I can always back up there because anything that grows in my yard and garden means something to me, right? So every week's not going to be a plant like that. Spoiler alert, this week is a plant like that, but not every plant will be like that. But if I ever get stuck, I can always fall back to the plants in my yard. So I just did a quick mental inventory of the plants growing in and around my yard, and I've come up with 60 or so. There's probably more. So that's at least over a year's of content of backup plants when I can't think of a plant that doesn't grow in my yard. So anyway, we're safe for a little while, everybody. And I am actively working to build my relationship with new plants so I can have those experiences to bring to you, the listener. So I think the show's going to go on for a long time. Probably not 4,000 years, but I don't know. You never know. Anyway, let's get on to our guest today. The guest on today's episode of Rootbound is my friend Anwesha. Hi, Anwesha.
Hi, Steve.
So do you have a plant you want to share with me?
I do. Should I go for it?
Please.
Okay. So I picked the mangrove. And that's, I can jump into a little bit of a description for, if anybody listening doesn't know, it's a general term for any like shrub or tree that grows on the coastline in like salty or brackish water. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, would you like to share why you chose the mangrove?
Sure. First of all, I just think they're really cool looking, but also I think I have a bit of a personal connection to it because I grew up in Florida, and in Florida, they're very common along the coastline. And I'm also from India. My family originates there, and they're also quite common there. And in fact, those are, I think, 2 of the biggest places where mangroves are sort of like big mangrove forests are known about. So I grew up seeing them when I would go down, especially down south. I grew up in the Tampa area, but when we would drive down through the Everglades, there's a lot of mangroves there in the sort of swamps. And then also in India, they tend to be more in the southern area. So last to last year, I went to Kerala in India, and that's like in the southern region where they have something called like the backwaters. It's like a term for this whole area of mangrove forests with like little canals. And there are a lot of little resorts around, but you can also take like a houseboat, which is literally, like a large canoe looking boat with a little hut on it. And sometimes there's even like a bed in there or like chairs. And you sort of just like cruise through the mangrove forests on a houseboat. Sometimes they'll like have someone join you and play music or, bring you snacks. My parents actually went on a houseboat trip through the mangrove forest where they caught fish while they were on the boat and then fried it and gave it to them. So it was a very, very full circle journey for them there. So, but I think that that's my personal connection to it.
That's very interesting. So now what you said earlier is that, and I think I didn't know this, that a mangrove isn't like a specific species. It is a like classification of a kind of shrub or tree.
Yeah, that's right. So I actually didn't know that either until, preparing for our chat today. But yeah, it's a general term for any shrub or tree that grows in the salty or brackish water. But then I found out when I did a little bit of Googling that the true mangrove, which maybe some of us think of like a specific type of tree as a mangrove, that's called genus Rhizophora. Rhizophora. And so that's like the true mangrove that you picture when you think of mangrove, but actually it encompasses like over 80 different species that are all classified as mangroves.
And do you know if there are, you said Rhizophora, is that the name you said?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if that there's genus Rhizophora growing in Florida and in India?
I don't know, actually.
Okay, well, if
I'm
you're
not sure about
listening,
that.
listener, and you know that answer, send me an email. But I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
that's the case because, well, I mean, plants are weird. Like sometimes you have plants where they only exist in like one continent, and sometimes you have plants where they exist everywhere. The same genus, maybe not the same exact plant, but the same genus will be like all over the globe, and it's very fascinating to think about how those plants moved
How they
about.
got there. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And um, anyway, that's pretty interesting. Rhizophora. I'm going to Google this real quick, which is
Yeah.
a lot of Googling. How do you spell that again?
Rhizophora. And also
Rhizophora.
another thing I learned while I was looking this up was especially in the south of Asia, Southeast Asia, mangroves are called mangals, like Mangal. So they call it like a mangal tree or a mangal forest. And I thought that was really interesting because mangal, at least in Hindi and Bengali, which are both languages that I speak, means like good or auspicious. Like often you'll give someone a blessing that says, may everything that happens to you be mangal, or may your journey be mangal. And that means like, may it sort of go well or be good. So I thought it was interesting that this tree also went by the same name in that area.
Interesting. Do you know if there is an etymological reason behind that?
I looked it up and I didn't find anything actually. I thought that was interesting because I thought there would be a lot that would say, well, Mongol means this in Hindi, but it actually, none of the mangrove resources that I found at least said that. I could have missed it, but it's possible that it's just like known in the region and no one really talks about it outside of that or online. I'm not sure.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't really. I don't think I've really been in a mangrove forest actually. Now that I
Yeah.
think about
You
it,
got
I
to add
haven't.
that to your list.
Seriously, I do. I've been in a lot of forests, but not a
Yeah.
mangrove forest. No, totally. Did you find any other fun facts or dazzling details about mangrove?
Yes, I did. I
Oh,
found
great.
a lot actually. Um, I can start by telling you a few interesting or dazzling things I found out about their biology. So, first, since they grow in salty water, first of all, that's pretty unique because most trees don't do that. So, they're very tolerant to salty conditions and low oxygen environments because their roots are literally submerged in water. And as someone who got into gardening, I can tell you how common overwatering is. I feel like every freaking gardening resource I ever read about anything that was happening to my many plants told me that I was probably overwatering them. So it's fascinating to hear about, this whole class of trees that literally thrive on being, quote, overwatered. Their whole root system is submerged in water around twice a day. And they are able to still draw nutrients in that sort of anaerobic environment. They also, I read that they absorb fresh water from the roots when it trickles down the roots as it rains. So, because converting, salt water to fresh water is pretty energy intensive, they really like it when it rains because they get some sort of like free fresh water that way as it trickles down their roots.
So is that like the primary way they actually are getting fresh water is getting it from rain and not from like some kind of desalinization process in the roots?
No, they do conduct a pretty robust
Oh,
desalinization process in their roots. So I read there's a couple different types. Some mangroves filter out the salt from the roots, like you said, and they're able to filter about 80% to 90% of the salt out of their roots. So people did tests of the water, that they're living in versus the water found inside of their stems, and there was a huge difference there. But other mangroves also secrete salt through their leaves, actually. So you can, if you look closely, you'll see like a white cast or little crystals on the leaves of salt. I was curious whether anybody like harvested salt that way, but I didn't find anything about that.
yeah. Or you just like stick a leaf in your meal and salt it up.
Stir it around, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty neat. And then another cool, like, biological fact about it was that the seeds actually sprout while they're already on the tree, which is kind of unique. And then they drop into the water and they spread that way. So they sort of float through the water and like plant themselves elsewhere. But they've sort of adapted to this completely, water-based system. So they sprout while they're on the tree and have access to the air and everything, and then drop into the water when they're ready.
Oh, wow. That is super fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like a little sprouted seed that is like floating on the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And then some other things I found out, and I think some of us already know about this, but they have a huge ecological value. So, their dense root systems help guard against water erosion. They're a habitat for lots of different kinds of fish and even sharks, I found out. And as well as animals above the surface, like monkeys and, I read even tigers. And from personal experience, I know raccoons because I once went to the Everglades and was on one of those little speedboat rides through the mangrove, swamps. And there were raccoons sort of coming down the mangrove roots to come check us out on the
Oh,
boat.
wow.
Uh,
That's either adorable or terrifying, depending on how you feel about raccoons.
I loved them at the time. I was a kid, and the the tour guide, was allowing us to feed them, which now in hindsight is not good, and I do not recommend. And this podcast does not condone this behavior, I'm sure, but
Very true.
we did it at the time, and so we fed raccoons marshmallows in the Everglades.
Their natural food.
Yes. I know better now, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
And
I mean,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, that's just such a great story about like humans' interaction with nature and how like misguided it all can be, and like yeah, and, like, and of course you don't know, like, oh yeah, but even thinking about it now, it's like, what? Feeding, first of all, feeding a wild animal, and second, feeding it marshmallows is like,
I mean,
yeah,
being on a speedboat in the mangrove forest, feeding it like raccoons marshmallows is like peak climate change behavior. So
seriously. Well, we all are learning. That's what this podcast
yes,
is about, and
yes.
you've learned that lesson long ago, I imagine.
Yes, I did. But yes, they have great ecological value, and apparently 80% of our fish catch around the world have some sort of connection to the mangroves. So if you like eating fish, you probably have that to owe to mangrove forests at
Oh,
some
wow.
point in that journey. And then some sad facts to close my
Sure,
little
yeah.
dazzling journey here. Sadly, they are getting destroyed, I guess, over time. Unfortunately, about 1% of mangroves are disappearing per year, apparently.
Whoa.
And so my home, Tampa Bay, has lost about 44% of its coastal wetlands already, which include both mangroves and also saltwater marshes. But, generally this kind of environment. So yeah, and that's due to all kinds of things, including coastal development, pesticide runoff, clear cutting mangrove wood, which is apparently termite resistant, so it's valuable for that reason. So yeah,
Wow. Well, that's the last dazzling detail.
that's the sad last dazzling detail.
Floating away from the salt marshes and silt-filled rivers of the mainland, carried by currents, the young mangrove seedlings can make long oceanic journeys.
Do you mind if I tell you about a plant?
I do not mind at all. I would love that.
Okay, great. Well, my plant is right here. I'm holding a mug. This is a podcast, so they can't see. I have tea in this mug, and the tea is a plant that I've been growing in my garden now for about 3 years. And
Wow.
and maybe I'll kind of go back to how I got to know this plant.
Yeah, please.
Drink some tea on the mic there. So my wife and I got this house. My wife Carla, you know her.
I
She
do
was
know
on
her.
she was on an episode a few episodes ago. We got this house, and I got really into gardening, which is one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I'm like super into plants now. And when we were starting the garden, I was like going through a website for seeds, and I'm like, what do I want to plant? I'm just looking through all these plants, and I'm picking, normal stuff like tomatoes and
Yeah.
carrots and all that stuff. But then I would see other things. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting plant. What is that? I've never heard of that before. And one of them that came up was a plant that was listed as Mexican mint marigold. And
Oh, cool.
I've never heard of that. I will order it. And I ordered it. I planted it, and it just grew great. It grew like crazy, but I still didn't really know what it is. I did some Googling about it, and kind of my understanding of the plant has kind of grown over the years. And now I feel like I understand it a fair amount. But it's sometimes called Mexican mint marigold. It's also sometimes called Mexican tarragon.
Oh.
Some of its other common names are, let me look this up here, sweet scented marigold. And then in Spanish, it's often called pericon or yerbaníz. And I know you speak a little Spanish. Yerbaníz, what would you think about that plant?
Like an anise flavored herb. I mean, like
Indeed.
yerba mate is, I don't know. That's the only
Yeah.
time I've heard yerba used in that way, but yeah.
Yeah, it is an anise flavored. So it has a very strong smell of anise. And so,
Oh.
and so, if you like that flavor, it's great. Not everyone likes it. How do you feel about anise?
I really like it.
Oh,
I
great.
actually cooked with tarragon the first time last Christmas, and I didn't know it had that kind of flavor at all. I just only heard the word tarragon, never actually tasted it. But
Yeah, so this is a little bit more strong than that. I don't know much about French tarragon, but this is quite a strong anise smell. And yeah, it's super tasty, and it makes great tea. Apparently, the tea is very popular across Latin America. I have also here some of the leaves right here. I'm doing show and tell on a podcast.
oh,
That's
cool!
fun. So these are dried leaves, but
Wow.
I'll get a little bit more into the tea. I have another sample here in a second, but let me talk about a few other dazzling details about the plant.
Yes, please.
So first of all, its Latin name is Tagetes lucida, which Tagetes is the marigold family. There's actually apparently two marigold families, Tagetes and Calendula, but the majority of them are Tagetes.
Are they related to the flower marigold family?
Yeah. Yep,
Oh,
absolutely.
cool.
In fact, they have a flower. It doesn't look the same. It's not as like poofy, we think of normal marigolds, but it is the flower is a really bright orange.
Oh, cool.
They're just smaller, but they're really pretty, but they're just not as poofy. But it is related to the marigolds we all think when we see marigolds. That's why I think it's called Mexican mint marigold, because it's from Mexico and like Central America. It is a marigold, but it also, I don't know why they call it mint, but it is like an herb. It's got much more of a flavor than most.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can eat other marigolds. That's not something I've researched. I know calendula is used sometimes in like herbal medicines, but I don't know about the other marigolds for food purposes. Tagetes lucida. Lucida means like bright and shining, and I think that's because the flower is really pretty and intense bright red. That's my theory. I didn't confirm that, so don't quote me on that. The name Tagetes is apparently named after the Etruscan god Tagus. I don't know why, but that's where the name of that family of plants comes from, is some Etruscan god. The plant is from Mexico, and so the Etruscan god has nothing to do with it, but its name in Nahuatl, which is the native language of the people around the Aztec areas of Mexico, is Yautli, and apparently it has been used for millennia as an incense, and is particularly connected to the rain god Tlaloc.
That's so cool.
There's a super cool statue of Tlaloc in Mexico City near the anthropological museum, which Carla has taken me a few times. But I was like, oh, when I was reading, oh, Tlaloc, I've seen that. I've seen the statue. So that's some of the fun facts. Now, when it comes to the tea I'm drinking, I am not drinking this green leaves that I'm showing you right now, these green dry leaves. I'm drinking a different style of tea, and that is a little bit of a longer story. So last summer we went to Alaska for vacation, and
I remember.
in the summer in Alaska, if you're out in any place where there's like plains or anything, you'll see this sea of pink flowers, and that's a plant called fireweed, and I've heard about that before. But this year when I was there, I was Googling it, and I looked it up, and I can't remember its Latin name, but I was Googling fireweed, and I was like, oh, what's the deal with fireweed? And one of the things that was listed under fireweed was that it's sometimes used as tea.
Oh.
And so so we're no spoilers. This plant is not related to fireweed at all. However, this is my thought process that was happening. I was reading that this fireweed has been used as tea, and then I read that they make the tea in a oxidatively aged process like you treat black tea. And then I was having this thought. I was like, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. Let me remind myself about how black tea is made and what the process for black tea, because, green tea and black tea are the same plant, right?
Yeah.
And the process for black tea is you take the fresh leaves and you like bruise them in some way. You crumple them up, or there's different machines that do it. And basically it causes these bruising, and then you age the tea oxidatively, and it's essentially the same process when a fruit gets bruised is what's happening to the tea, and that's what turns it from green to black.
Really?
And
when a fruit gets bruised, it's not great, and then it kind of looks like it's rotting.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's happening here. It's got to be in a controlled fashion, and some people will call that fermentation, but it's actually not fermentation, it's just oxidation.
Okay.
So stuff inside the leaf is oxidating and changing the flavor profile and turning it dark. And so once you do that for a little bit, once you oxidatively age the tea, then you fire it, you put it in an oven, which will stop that process. You evaporate all the liquid,
water,
and the process stops. So that's how you make tea. And then I read that people do this with fireweed as well. And I was like, why are other plants, why don't we make tea out of other leaves in that same process? Like, until that point, I'd only ever heard of tea being made that way, like the tea leaf. And then there's this other plant they do it with. And then I was like, well, why don't I try that with something I'm growing? And then I was thinking, well, the leaves of Yerbaníz, they're of the similar consistency of the fireweed. They're much smaller, but they're like a little bit tough. So like they're not going to just crumple if I bruise them. So I tried it. I went home. I picked a bunch of the Yerbaníz. I stuck it between my hands and like rolled it up, like into like balls and stuff. And then I put it in a mason jar with like just a cloth over it, so it's not like airtight, for about 24 hours. And I stuck it in a tray in the oven for like 10 minutes on kind of I forget what heat. And this is what came out. This is the
Whoa, that looks like tea.
Oxidatively aged Yerbaníz tea, which is better, in my opinion. Maybe it's just because I put more work into it, but is better than just the regular green stuff. I like the green stuff too. Here's some of the tea. I'm showing it to the camera here.
Whoa, that's so cool. So for those of you listening, Steve just showed me a bowl full at first of like green dried leaves. So it's kind of like if you looked at, a dried eucalyptus wreath or something where it still has that green color and a little bit ashy, but it's dry. And then the mason jar kind is completely browned. So it looks like, your regular tea that you would think of when you think of tea that you're brewing from a loose leaf version.
And thank you for the description. That was really, really useful.
No problem.
I always sometimes forget. Well, I mean, I don't forget, but I should remember that this is a podcast. It is not a visual medium, but it's fun to show stuff on podcasts and have people use their imagination. But the smell is much stronger, and that's what I was drinking just now, is the oxidatively aged Yerbaníz. And the reason I chose this plant is because last time we visited you, I brought some of this, but I left it in my hotel for you. So I owe you some of this next time I see you.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to try it.
That was the tea. Handmade, home oxidized Yerbaníz tea.
Wow. That's really cool. So a couple questions.
Yeah.
First, when you're growing this, are you getting those bright orange flowers, or do you prevent it from flowering so that you get more leaves to make more tea?
No, we do get the bright orange flowers, and some you can use the flowers too in the tea. But
Oh,
this year we set up an ofrenda for Dia de los
yeah.
Muertos, and we used the flowers on the ofrenda, which are marigolds are used for that, and we didn't have any marigolds, so
That's
we
so cool.
used
Do you want
that.
to say what an ofrenda is?
Oh yeah, I mean if you've seen the movie Coco, the Disney movie
I
Coco
have, and that's how I know what it is.
is a good starter for that. I mean, I didn't have much knowledge, but of that either as a, but my wife is Mexican, and so it's a Mexican holiday that is around Halloween that is about giving respect to your ancestors, and you set up a like an altar where you have pictures of them and various things to like guide their spirits. It's a fun, beautiful holiday, and we use the Yerbaníz flowers on that, which traditionally use marigold. But I guess I even read some places that sometimes this is used, or it's in the same family. It looks pretty.
Yeah.
It works. So
That's pretty
yeah,
cool. And then when between the two kinds, like what is the taste of the green kind? Does it taste more like, that green flavor? Like if you eat a blade of grass, that like green flavor, does it taste more like that
I don't think
than
it's that green flavor, but it is a little bit like the difference between green tea and black tea.
okay.
Right? It's a
Yeah.
little bit sharper. Um, yeah, I'm not really good at describing flavors, but it's not
I'll
quite
have
as
to try.
strong. And I think you also need to steep it longer. I think that's one thing that happens when you do the oxidative process is it releases the
The
compounds much
flavors.
faster because the hot water can activate that more. So I like them both. I end up putting the green stuff mixing with other teas. I've been growing a bunch of teas, and spoiler alert, there'll probably be lots of teas that I grow on this podcast in the future. Actually, episode 5 is a tea that I am growing. You've heard it. It's not out yet for you, but for everyone else, it is out. You've maybe already heard it, but I'm growing that one. But that's going to be a theme because there's a number of other plants that I'm growing for tea in the garden because they're kind of easy to grow.
I didn't know that. I would have never even thought to grow a tea. I mean, I grow mint and I've tried putting like a few mint leaves into, hot water. But I actually think, maybe with mint too, you're supposed to do something to it first because like the fresh leaves, I don't know. It
I think
wasn't
it's
that
better dried.
strong. Yeah.
I think it's better dried because then the water can like suck the flavors out. Whereas if there's already water in there, it's harder for the water to
Oh, that's such a
pull.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Or you can crush it up more. But I think drying might help.
Hmm.
I'm growing mint as well, which was actually the focus of an episode. Episode number 3 was mint, and I talked about mint. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, you should listen to that one.
Yeah, I will. I'll get the
Yeah,
dazzling
yeah,
details on mint too then.
indeed.
Nice.
No, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the only problem with growing tea is you have like a balcony garden is like when you're pulling leaves, like potentially you might need more, like you need a decent volume, right? Because tea,
Hmm.
right? It's not like a vegetable or whatever. Like you need a lot of leaves, but you've got enough space. You could grow more teas.
Yeah, I totally could. And I mean, I've been trying out different plants to grow too. So maybe next summer, once it warms up around here, I can try that out. I mean, I'm curious, I guess, with herbs, what I was learning last summer as I was trying to garden like different kinds of things, like with fruiting plants, the goal was to stop getting the plant from producing so many leaves and go into the reproduction phase and like fruit. But for herbs where we don't want their fruit, um, usually the advice was to just prune them back and get rid of any flowering that was occurring because otherwise it would ruin the flavor of the leaves or sort of like start putting all its energy into the flower and fruit as opposed to the leaves. So is there anything like that where like if you wanted this tea to taste the best, you should prevent it from ever flowering?
Yeah, well, that's actually a good point. With this one, I haven't found that preventing it from flowering, but just as the leaves get older, they're tougher and maybe not as flavorful. But
Mm,
it's actually still pretty good. It's not like something like basil, where like when basil flowers, it just like
yeah.
it's just not fun anymore. Um, um, but this one is not really like that. But I did find that, which also I took a little bit of that hint from reading about tea, is taking the like some of the nicer tea is hand harvested, and they just take off the tops of the stems, like the
Oh.
smaller, younger leaves that are coming at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing that a little bit for some of them,
And then what
but
do you do
also
with the lower leaves?
well, in this case, I end up just harvesting it all, so I have a whole bunch hanging up to dry and all.
Oh, cool.
I'll end up like using some of it, but honestly, some of it will end up being composted by the end of the year. Like I didn't use all of it last year.
Yeah.
I got to get better at using my herbs in that way. Like I could dry it and powder it, but I don't know how I would use it in culinarily. I've done a little bit experimenting with that, like using it for tarragon,
Yeah.
but not enough yet. So I need to do more. But
Yeah.
like,
Can you eat it straight?
yeah, you can
Or
chew
like
on
in
a
a
leaf.
salad or no?
You
Too
could add
strong?
it. You could add it to a salad. I think I wouldn't use the older leaves because they're a little bit tougher, but
Tough.
the younger leaves. But like you wouldn't want to add too many because it's pretty strong. But that's a good idea. I should try it. I need to get better at using stuff. I get like narrowed in on one thing, and then I like
Yeah.
make an oxidized tea. But like I need to figure out how to use it to its extent, especially because it grows so well and it's perennial, so it comes back every year, and it seems to come back bigger. And like last year, I needed to like be really aware to like keep it from like overgrowing the herb bed, and I need to even do a better job this year because it kind of overgrow the herb bed. So
Wow.
I need to like trim it back and make more tea early in the year so it doesn't like get so big. So
Yeah. It sounds like it likes your garden. Like the climate is good for it.
yeah, apparently, we're
It's
quite a bit
significantly
further.
colder than in Mexico, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and so
But
I wonder about that, but yeah, it seems to do great, and that's what I'm learning now in my garden. Is I want to pick the plants to just grow with my least interaction possible. Um, that's what I'm not really like I don't have the greenest thumb, but I just like will pick the plants to just do their best. So yeah,
cool. Well,
well,
yeah.
yeah. Well, that's my plant.
Awesome. It's a really cool plant, and I can't wait to try the tea at some point. I'll have to make a note next
Yep.
time to
Next
get
time
that
we
from
see
you.
each other,
Yeah.
I will bring you some tea.
Can't wait.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Sounds good. Bye.
So I was doing some research on mangroves after my conversation with Anwesha, and I learned that there are many different types, but there are 4 genuses that are very common, and so let's learn about those genuses courtesy of a 1970s educational film.
Several distantly related families of flowering plants have evolved species of mangroves. Red mangroves, Rhizophora, at the water's edge. Black mangroves, Avicennia, just inland of the red, overhanging. The white, Laguncularia, oval-shaped leaves and multiple trunks. The button, Conocarpus, forest maker of the coast. 4 distinct species, each occupying a different position in the structure of the mangrove community. A community of trees that invades the sea by building up the soil.
My guest on today's episode of Rootbound was Anwesha Banerjee. Anwesha is an attorney and urban gardening enthusiast. Rootbound is hosted by me, Steve Ellington. Music by Christian Kriegaskota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. But if you can go outside, perhaps you could explore a mangrove forest if that's something nearby to you. But perhaps leave the marshmallows at home.
Rain, the preferred precipitation of flora worldwide.